Good morning, scholars. I'm going to provide a supplemental review for our upcoming test. That's going to cover 1848 to 1871. You have the first installment in an earlier video, and so this will cover the latter half, which we look at realpolitik, nationalism, and realism. We're first going to start with quote-unquote the age of realpolitik, which was Bismarck's philosophy translates to the reality of politics. He took a Machiavellian standpoint: the ends justify the means, better to be feared than loved. He, brilliant, manipulative, deceitful, always got his way. He would not go to war against another country unless he knew he could defeat them. We've also talked about nationalism being the most potent of the isms, because you could be a conservative nationalist, you could be a socialist nationalist, you could be a liberal nationalist. So nationalism is really the underbelly of so many of these themes throughout 1848. Before we go into the unification process, briefly looking at the age of realism, we talked last chapter about the age of romanticism and how romanticism was this great way for individuals to express themselves following the suppressive nature of Napoleon Bonaparte. Realpolitik is kind of like the opposite. It's kind of like a reaction to romanticism, looking at real life situations. Charles Dickens, for example, the paintings that I have on here by Courbet, you're looking at real situations, men working in the field or females working in the field. There's no emotion that comes from that. A lot of these paintings got criticism because, really and truly, according to the critics, who wants to look at real life? Some of the science that came about during the Age of Realism also is a response to the Industrial Revolution and people moving into cities. We've talked about Edwin Chadwick and cholera, and he looked at entire neighborhoods that were dying from cholera, all stemmed from the same watering well. So Louis Pasteur, Joseph Lister came up with great inventions, theories that could help save people, the germ theory. That also is going to translate to when we talk about the Crimean War. Florence Nightingale is going to bring all of these ideas to save men. When you look at the population video I showed in class, period 5, we haven't watched it yet, but I'm going to put that link on Blackboard so you can watch it. The Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, population exploded. Well, why? Well, two reasons, really. We don't have massive famines, and we have all these new inventions of keeping people alive. Charles Darwin is another example. Evolution. He wasn't the one who actually coined that term. Survival of the fittest. In class, we debated between these two paintings. I think both classes came up with the correct answer, that this was the more positive painting because it showed a female in a passive, submissive way. Where this painting by Manet, she was a courtesan, and it was her decision to take on this lifestyle, and she's a sexual being, and she has power, and that was very threatening to most people during the 1800s. Moving from the Age of Realism to our first war, before we really get started into the unification process, but the Crimean War, and basically you're looking at the Crimean Peninsula right here, which of course is right at the south tip of the Ukraine. And what was happening is, generic explanation is that the Russians wanted warm water parts, where it got complicated is that that's part of the Ottoman Empire, and the Turks were allowing French into that territory, and that upset the Russians. So the Russians started sending troops down into the Crimean Peninsula. The Turks declared war on Russia, which then led Britain and France taking on the side of the Turks. We talked in class why? Why on earth? Why would Britain and France, two very strong European Christian powers, go against a fellow European Christian power and support the Ottomans? Well, there you go. Balance of power right here. By allowing the Russians to get those warm water ports, Russia could have emerged as this massive, massive power, and Britain and France didn't want that to happen. So basically, North Italy is also going to join against Russia. Austria is going to join against Russia. That also is going to be shocking to Europe, particularly Russia, because Russia and Austria had been best good friends leading up into the 1850s with the principle of intervention. The Russians helped Austria fight the Germans. The Russians helped Austria fight the Italians. So this was pretty shocking. The end of the war, basically, really shifted the balance of power. Austria and Russia, like I just said, are enemies. Russia turns itself inward to focus on itself. This is the emancipation of the serfs. This is the attempt to industrialize. This is our Alexander II. Austria is pretty much isolated. And this situation allows for Italy and Germany to unite, which is incredibly important because that ultimately leads to the stepping stones for the outbreak of World War I. Your fun facts, basically, well, in my opinion, your fun facts is live war reporting. We have our first photographs invented by the Frenchman Louis Daguerre. The first pictures were called daguerreotypes. And why this revolutionized warfare is because war wasn't just a distant thing that guys were killing guys. No one really knew what was happening. You know, you might lose a loved one, a husband, a boyfriend, a brother, but there's actual images from the war. So it changes everything. When we get to World War I in the trenches, we actually know what it was like in those trenches. This will then lead us into video cameras. World War II, there are actual videos, not just pictures, of kamikazes smashing into our ships. Florence Nightingale, really important gal. She is an English nurse, and she went down to the Crimean Peninsula, and she was shocked. Like I said before on the earlier slide, she was shocked with the men who were more so dying from infection of being shot at as opposed to just being shot at and dying. The British Medal Victoria Cross, this cross was introduced during this war, and it's the highest award you can get in England for active valor. So I just want to briefly go into some countries and then close it up. France, we left off. The Second French Republic. The First French Republic was under Robespierre. The Second French Republic is under Louis Napoleon. He issues a plebiscite in 1851. He, popular vote, almost unanimously, takes on the title of Emperor Napoleon III with the goal of returning France to its glory days. His first 5 days, he's able to his goal is essentially to be like his uncle Napoleon Bonaparte. In his first 5 years, he was able to successfully limit a lot of the liberal reforms, and how was he able to do that? Well, basically his beautification. He made Paris absolutely splendid under the leadership of Baron George von Haussmann. And Haussmann was the engineer, the architect behind the brains behind making Paris as we know it today, with gas lights and underground sewage, very wide, beautiful boulevards. Again, I said in class, he wanted to make sure that another revolution couldn't take place, that the French couldn't throw up barricades, canals, roads, harbors, etc. He also started the Suez Canal creation. This will eventually be taken over by British when the British take over Egypt as a colony. His foreign policy, not so great. Although the Crimean War, a lot of Europeans viewed him as the true victor because, think about it, France was a total loser country, and within 30 years he goes into the Crimean War and he wins, so woohoo for France. But a lot of the liberals in France were extremely irritated. Why on earth would this man start a foreign war? Let's focus on France. So flip-flop. Mexico, we talked about Cinco de Mayo and that he got irritated that the Mexicans owed him money. They didn't pay back, so he sent Maximilian into Mexico. Cinco de Mayo is the only battle that the Mexicans won. It's not a great holiday for Mexicans. Eventually, he is going to have to, in the 1860s, he had to issue some more liberal reforms because the French demanded them. So he never fulfilled his dream of ruling like his uncle. However, he is in power from 1848 to 1871. So technically, pretty good job. Germany. The humiliation of Olmütz, if you can't remember what that is, but basically that was the Germans' attempt to unify, halted by the Austrians and the Russians. And so a new plan emerged, and that was Klein Deutsch. And that was the thought process of unifying the German states without Austria. Wilhelm I, Kaiser, or so sorry, don't write that down. King Wilhelm I appoints Otto von Bismarck as his prime minister, and the reason he did that is because he's a junker, he's a noble class, and he knows he could make good with other junkers. And like I said at the beginning, Bismarck, yes, he's obsessed with power, he's brilliant, he's manipulative. He also went in favor with the king because of his gap theory, and his gap theory was basically if there is, because Prussia has a constitutional monarchy at this point, so if there was an issue between the king and the parliament, there was a gap, then ultimately the decision would rest with the king. And naturally, of course, the king loved that. He also made his famous Blood Iron speech, and he made fun of the 1848 talks. And he said, you guys all you were doing is talking about unifying. You need to unify Germany with blood and iron. Very famous speech. I recommend you Google it and read it for yourself. Raised taxes, military conquest. His first chunks of land that he went after with the help of Austria was Schleswig and Holstein. There's a map later on that you can see. This is just North Prussia, North Germany. And basically, again, he's manipulative. He did this on purpose. He knew that joint rule would be difficult, so although they beat Denmark, they being Prussia and Austria, he ends up in a war versus Austria to gain that land back just for himself. And this is the Austro-Prussian War, 70 Weeks War, 1866, so 3 years later. Prussia at this point has industrialized. They are incredible. They have much faster rifles. They have railroads. The industries, factories. On top of that, like I said at the beginning, he's brilliant at making sure his enemy has no friends. So Russia didn't get involved. France didn't get involved with the promise of land. Italy didn't get involved with the promise of land. So Bismarck, at the end of this war, is able to unify all German states. So now we have the North German Confederation under the leadership of King Wilhelm I, Bismarck as prime minister, and the Reichstag, which is essentially the German parliament with the upper and the lower house. The Franco-Prussian War, he realizes in his mind, again, he's a military genius, that in order to unify the South Catholic German states, he needs to spark a war with France. He also wants a piece of French territory, which is the Alsace and Lorraine. We'll talk a lot about that in the next couple of weeks. So how this goes down is basically the Queen of Spain disposed. The closest heir to the Spanish throne is a Prussian prince. The King of Prussia basically, says to Napoleon III, we're not going to get involved. Why is Napoleon III involved in this at all? Is because if you look at the geography, look at this map down here real quick. This is Prussia, aka Germany. This is France. To the west of France is Spain. And if a Prussian prince became the king of Spain, France would be sandwiched between two Prussian powerhouses. So the king writes a note to Napoleon basically saying, I'm not going to get involved. He gives it to his prime minister, Mr. Bismarck, to edit it. Bismarck changed the words. That he's essentially insulting Napoleon III. Napoleon III has no choice but to declare a war on Germany. This is the Franco-Prussian War. Prussia easily defeats France. There's no doubt this would have happened. And so the result of this in January is France, the Second Republic, is toppled. France owes money. France loses land. But more importantly, the Second German Reich is created with Kaiser Wilhelm I and Imperial Chancellor Bismarck. Moving right along to Italy. Italy, 1848, again, the talks of unifying Italy collapsed. And so the thought of moving to one Italian state, Sardinia, Piedmont, under the leadership of Victor Emmanuel II and Count Cavour, shifted. And Cavour is much like Bismarck, using the philosophy of realpolitik. He joins Napoleon III as an ally during the Crimean War. And the whole reason he did that is because he knew that he needed help to fight Austria to get northern Italian states. So Napoleon III promised Cavour that he would help him fight Austria to get the northern Italian lands. Well, it works. He gets the land, but Cavour backs off because of, Napoleon III backs off because out of fear of this massive Austria, this massive growing Prussia. So Cavour's furious, but still he's able to successfully unify North Italy. Down in the south, what's going on is Giuseppe Garibaldi, and Garibaldi is this romantic, he's this passionate man, he has this army of rebels, the red shirts, and he's unifying the south. Cavour is not going to allow this to happen, so Cavour, very symbolically, very patriotically, sends, he himself goes down with all of his troops, and they send a plebiscite. In February of 1861, we have the unification of Italy minus Rome and Venice. Victor Emmanuel is the king, Cavour is the prime minister. Unfortunately, a little fun fact, 3 months after this, Cavour dropped dead, just probably from exhaustion and stress, so note to self, don't stress yourself out so much. A couple years later, 5 years later, Venice is incorporated into Italy, and how this worked is if you go back to your notes, and this is extremely confusing, the 7 Weeks War. Bismarck promised Emmanuel if he fought with Prussia, or if he stayed out of essentially if he supported Prussia and didn't get involved, he would get Venice. 1871, Rome is captured by Italian troops. Dun, dun, dun. We have a unified Italy with Rome as the capital. Italy is still economically divided. Basically, what's left is Austria-Hungary, the Compromise, Russia, Tsar Alexander II, Alexander III, and the Ottoman Empire. If there are any questions on that, I'm not going to do a whole new video. Please let me know. I feel like I've covered the very complicated stuff, but please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for your time.